A Friend Request, written by Paul Sear, Chapter 2, Modern Science and Beyond. This is going to be a bit of a chore. I'm up for the challenge. Therefore, I shall examine our current field of activities in regards to modern science, how it relates to the Supreme Lord, and how one can understand it in relationship to the Lord's loving service. I will extend an invitation to one immersed in modern scientific knowledge to take into consideration man's limitations in regards to sensory observation. The greatness of the Supreme Lord shall be described. I shall present a description of how we are being engaged by his external energy, material nature. I shall offer an appeal to consider the vast activity situated outside our normal field of activity, how it relates to modern technology and science. An illustration of both the ascending and descending paths for cultivating knowledge will be offered, how by the desire of the Lord both run parallel with each other, the descending being superior. I will present for your consideration an examination of the realm of ethereal mental activity, how we are active on both the gross material plane all of us are familiar with and the ethereal mental plane simultaneously. I will examine the landscape of the ethereal mental plane, its characteristics and inhabitants. The characteristics of this unusual frontier of the mind will be examined to help one become situated beyond mental slavery, beyond the confines of this strange realm. I desire to present this rather elusive subject matter with a foundation based in Scripture. Therefore, I will be selecting verses from the Bhagavad Gita that give reference to this mysterious realm of consciousness. I will do my best to explain these concepts with terminology and examples anyone can understand with a bit of effort. My desire is that one understand how this field of activity is manifest and how one can spiritualize it by directing one's human energy towards the loving service of the Lord. I do have personal experience of this unusual frontier of consciousness. You can say that I have walked thoroughly along this side of the road. Now, I am here to report back to you my observations and conclusions about it. I will explain my findings with a strong desire to empower you to become transcendental to this realm, even though situated in it, empowering you to be successful in the loving service of the Lord beyond this subtle realm of the mind. The tree of technological advancement has sprouted from a small seedling. Pressing up to the soil of man's imagination with the creation of fire weapons used in warfare, towards the sky it has climbed, standing magnificent like a mature banyan tree bearing many fruits, culminating in the computerization of practically every aspect of man's life. With little effort, we can reach out and attain things from distant lands, fly in the sky like birds, communicate with others situated in the most remote locations at will. If so desired, there's no difficulty in surveying the activities of others far off and nearly anywhere. It's described in Vedic truths that these gifts of knowledge, and many more, some still unknown to modern man, are categorized as mystic siddhis, perfections. These perfections were and still are attained by powerful yogis by performing the appropriate austerities and meditation. One can't help but wonder whether the wholesale availability of these mysteries of knowledge need be categorized as blessing or curse. Not a whole lot of fatalities can be chalked up to the head-on collision between horse-drawn carriages. Yet in my state alone, it's reported that over 1,000 road fatalities have occurred this year with nearly 2 months to go. So surely the death toll shall rise for this year in my state. This is one state in one country. Therefore, is not our advancement in scientific knowledge responsible for claiming these lives? Coca leaves have been chewed for thousands of years in the foothills of the Andes without incident. Once embraced by science, this same plant, harmless to many, now claims thousands of lives every year in the form of cocaine. Many more examples are there of scientific advancement being the cause of great havoc for the entire world. Surely many medicines and cures are also the product of modernization in science. However, these cures often come for ailments created by the same technology, and many of these modern medicines cure one disease while creating other problems to face. A bit less refined but therapeutic as well is the use of plants and herbs to cure man's ailments, successfully treating the entire spectrum of man's health problems for thousands of years. Undoubtedly, modern technology and scientific advancement has assisted in the forward march of economic development. As stated earlier, there's no denying that economic development has become the main gauge for metering man's success. Therefore, the sacrifices all must endure by the advancements in technology must be considered worth the cost. If not, why would we continue its embrace? Has modernization become a runaway train headed towards man's ultimate destruction? Man's appetite for knowledge appears to some to be sumptuously fed by the fruits of modern education. However, there's no denying a vacuum of understanding being prominent in the education about the relationship between the spirit soul and the Supreme Lord. Religion being dismissed as phantasmagoria by many, doubts seem to dominate spirituality. According to the great spiritual personalities of times past, spiritual understanding is the appropriate engagement for the human intelligence, not the building of atom bombs. These challenges that confront modern man would not be of issue if abandoned for a simpler form of living. Simple living and high thinking is the recommended practice. However, this philosophy of simple living and high thinking is often thoroughly rejected by some. Blinded by desires to falsely possess more and more, some scoff at the idea of simplicity, taking it to be a request to return to some primitive state of human life. In reality, the more complex a lifestyle, the more one becomes entangled in its consequences. The system of these subtle laws of action and reaction, karma, will act, regardless of modern man's ignorance of them. There is no democratic due process when considering the laws of nature. It's not that man shall form a committee and vote on whether nature's laws shall act. Nature's laws will act regardless of the decisions of planning boards. Everyone shall die someday but her. We have voted. She shall never die, is the content of a well-scripted fairy tale. The laws of nature have little concern for the plans of man when contradicted by them. Mother Nature, being subordinate to the desires of the Lord, is quite competent to foil all the plans of man's committees and planning commissions. All this should seriously be taken into consideration by the wise. Still present, yet much less optimistic, is the bold declaration that modern scientific knowledge shall conquer death. Some decades of very advanced scientific research have passed, yet no success in solving the death problem, nor has there been any progress towards thwarting the onslaught of old age. So the struggle for supremacy over nature continues. Undoubtedly, such speculative labor remains very lucrative business for some. In reality, modern medicine is not far off from where it began. When modern scientific research brings a dead body back to life, I shall give it due credit. This shall never take place. I truly believe this is becoming apparent to everyone. Modern man is rather reluctant in considering his limitations. A warm glow within may consume one when a material scientific truth is discovered. However, the Lord will not agree to be captured by the educated speculations of man's brain. He is cleverer than us, and shall win in a race of wits every time. One may be satisfied by the merit of accumulated material education. However, human life as a whole is meant for so much more. One intoxicated by the knowledge harvested from one's mental effort is often very reluctant to hear of the greatness of the Lord. Please allow me to illustrate the situation. The Lord is situated in the spiritual realm. He is the center of affection for all the inhabitants there. When one desires to be the center, one is situated here in this world of matter. The Lord is more than capable of supplying those determined to continue their occupation in this world of death, the play toy of material knowledge in order to keep them engaged. Therefore, the embodied living entity situated here is too consumed to disturb the Lord and the inhabitants of the spiritual world. The embodied living entity's material consciousness is unsuitable for the atmosphere of the spiritual realm. Therefore, the spirit soul in material contact, who is originally full in transcendental knowledge, is situated here, entangled in the web of one's own elusive mental speculations. Once again, this is not taking place due to any ill will embraced by the Lord. The Lord strongly desires the spirit souls here in the material atmosphere to return to their original blissful condition, devotional service. The Lord is quite competent to foil all plans made by the embodied living entities to build a staircase to the absolute truth. There would be no question of existing in this world of matter if we completely understood things as they are. Due to the adamant desire to live separately from the loving service of the Lord supplies an alternative to the truth, therefore giving the embodied soul an opportunity to live independently. So undoubtedly, one may use one's intelligence to analyze the elements of this world, even arrive at conclusions based on sound evidence attained through the agency of the material senses. However, all one's hard work in this effort shall not solve the problems one is ultimately challenged by. The inconveniences of death, old age, and disease will continue to haunt the spirit souls in material contact here in this world. This is the order of the Lord. The Lord desires that the soul situated here return to the spiritual realm. However, if one is determined to stay here, the Lord facilitates the spirit soul by providing some engagement in the form of mental speculation. This is an honest illustration of what is actually taking place. Please consider the following example that illustrates the limitations of man's material senses. If a needle was to be tossed into a large dark room devoid of sunlight or other light, One could spend the entire day without successfully finding it. The eyes are dependent on sunlight or some other source of light to function appropriately. How can one expect to engage one's limited eyes in building a telescope, point it towards the heavens, and hope to come to a definitive conclusion about what's happening in space? This is not possible. If one builds an instrument with one's limited senses, certainly the knowledge acquired shall be limited as well. This is common sense. However, as stated, man is very reluctant to consider his overwhelming limitations. It certainly requires a bit of humility in honestly taking into account one's limitations, but this is essential in solving the problems of life. There is an alternative process for cultivating knowledge, for one that can embrace a bit of humility. It has nothing to do with the tedious labor of manufacturing a staircase to the truth. The knowledge descending through disciplic succession is recommended for one who is serious about knowing what is what and is endorsed by the Lord. The definition of disciplic succession in Vedic truths is a line of teachers and students inaugurated by the Lord himself. This means that if one is factually connected to this line by learning from one who is connected, there is little difference from being the personal student of the Lord. All knowledge is ultimately descending from the Lord in the form of Vedic scripture. Veda means to know, so all scripture, regardless of origin, is a branch of the Vedas. The mystery of the origin of knowledge is nothing less than elusive. By the desire of the Lord, if one does not accept on faith that all knowledge is descending from the Lord, one will be baffled in their attempt to discover the source of all knowledge. It appears to be many-branched. However, this is not so. The confidential devotees of the Lord are not confused in these matters. An example, the Latin for Christ is Christos. In India, when calling the Lord's name, Krista is often used to call on Krishna. Please make the final decision in your own intelligence. Is there a vast difference between the names Krista and Christos? For a devotee, the truth is self-evident. However, for one always opposed to the service of the Lord, things are not so clear. One may tirelessly declare there is absolutely no correlation between the two aspects of calling on the Lord's name, even though the evidence before one suggests otherwise. As stated earlier, this is the test of the Lord. One who is not very serious about understanding things as they are will be captivated by the differences, the duality, rather than the self-evident similarities. Therefore, only the determined seeker of absolute understanding shall enter into the finer aspects of the absolute truth. The Lord is engaging everyone in relation to the desires lying within. He knows our heart. Although he is far away, situated in the spiritual realm, he is near to all as well, situated as a neighbor of the spirit soul. The Lord can understand the desires of the embodied living entity, similar as to how one can understand the essence of a flower by smelling its fragrance. There is no question of deceiving the Lord in this matter. When one is ultimately prepared to surrender to the Lord, the gates to divine understanding swing wide open. A bit less surrendered, one is engaged by the Lord in seeking heavenly pleasures after death. Therefore, they are encouraged to perform the appropriate activities and ultimately attain a so-called higher status of material sense gratification in the future. When determined not to surrender at all, rather always prepared to blaspheme against the Lord's loving service, one is engaged appropriately that they may descend into a hellish, miserable condition of life. This is taking place regardless of whether one believes or not. The following is an example often used by Prabhupada that illustrates how this is taking place. A sage came upon 4 individuals and desired to offer some blessings: a prince, a yogi performing severe austerities, a devotee of the Lord, and a butcher. To the prince the sage blessed, "You live forever." The yogi was blessed, "You die immediately." The devotee of the Lord was blessed, "You live or die." And the butcher was blessed, "Don't live, don't die." The moral example is that the prince is engaged in such worldly sense gratification, being well endowed in this way, that better he live forever, because after death there will be so many reactions to endure due to a worldly lifestyle. The yogi engaged in life under so many restrictions with the idea of attaining better status in the future would be better off to die and go enjoy a higher status of life. The devotee of the Lord is engaged in the Lord's loving service here in this world. After death, the devotee will continue on with the same business, therefore making it irrelevant whether the devotee lives or dies. And the butcher is engaged in slaughtering innocent animals daily. Therefore, the butcher's lifestyle is obscene at present, and the butcher will be required to answer for all the pain and misery that's been caused. Therefore, don't live, don't die. In respects to all this, I'd like to declare the elusive nature in desiring heavenly pleasures as one's ultimate goal. This is extremely relative. I have personally seen very obscene situations where the participants seem very satisfied, as if they had achieved some sort of heavenly status. The expression, "a fool's paradise," comes to mind. influenced through association, it's very easy to get confused about what is and what is not heavenly pleasure in this world. The nature of this world is that it's full of traps. Often one can become enchanted by bad association, a come join the party type of scenario. Being hardly in one's interest, one may find oneself whisked away into a variety of fantastic heavenly scenarios, all being founded on illusion. The story of Pinocchio being whisked off to an island of carnival only to be transformed into a donkey immediately comes to mind. This is not an accident. With a heavy heart, the Lord understands the desires and motivations of a particular living entity and engages them accordingly. In this world of death, some wish to be cheated, while others desire to cheat whenever possible. This is the nature of the material world. Therefore, taking refuge from all this nonsense, one should enthusiastically take up the service of the all-blissful Lord and enjoy spiritual satisfaction, not to be found in any corner of this temporary world of matter. Now, abandoning all speculations and taking up devotional service to the Lord can undoubtedly be a difficult task. However, by accepting the appropriate guidance, it is certainly possible. By the desire of the Lord, I have endured so many awkward states, been severely perplexed. All with the Lord's desire, I discover the proper understanding to overcome my perplexities, therefore making it possible for me to report to you how this is possible. Don't be surprised at the challenges one may face in the adoption of devotional service to the Lord. The scenario is not far different from the perplexities Arjuna had to face, having his entire family and loved ones ready to battle against him. This is not at all a coincidence. Unfortunately, one will come to realize that this world is not inundated with individuals looking to solve their problems and escape the clutches of death. Even when one does wish to escape, often one is immediately misguided and caught due to subconsciously desiring otherwise. It's quite possible your own friends and family members may become adverse to your execution of the Lord's loving service. One should understand this appropriately. Material nature is not different from a type of prison. Now, it's strongly encouraged by the Lord as well as the Lord's devotees that one escape this prison. Similar to any other prison, this is not at all easy. When one enthusiastically takes to the loving service of the Lord, one is basically declaring war upon material nature. Therefore, material nature places so many obstacles before the practitioner in an attempt to derail one who tries to escape. Material nature, governed by a real person, holds the post given by the Lord of a warden of this material world, and has many agents to accomplish this. More than likely, unless one has the great fortune of being born into the family of transcendentalists, one's family and friends can be utilized by material nature in an attempt to deviate one from the path. Therefore, one need not feel any animosity towards one's friends and family being obstacles in one's spiritual understanding. It is indirectly a test by the Lord to evaluate one's sincerity. Don't be at all surprised if you're required to choose between the intimate association with loved ones and the devotional service of the Lord. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to walk the lonesome valley for yourself, a valley no one can actually walk for you. This is certainly difficult. However, one must be convinced of its ultimate benefit. If not convinced, detaching oneself from material association will be next to impossible. God helps those that help themselves. Nobody wants to die, yet we all must die someday. Therefore, one should be very convinced of their awkward situation in this world of death. One who is very sincere is guaranteed the assistance of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, whatever the price, one should immediately pay it in order to attain the loving service of the Lord. When one becomes mature in devotional service, one will be well equipped to give spiritual association rather than be influenced by material association. There are numerous ways of giving spiritual association to others. I will discuss this in depth later in this text. This is a defining characteristic of a devotee. No one can convince a devotee that the Lord does not exist. However, the devotee can convince others of the greatness of the Lord. In regards to the tests of the Lord never gives a test one is unable to pass. I find this encouraging, lending me strength in continuing forward, steadfast, on the path towards the full-fledged loving service of the Lord. Moving forward, I'd like to discuss in detail the greatness of the Lord and how his energies are manifest in this world of matter. For one handicapped by severe immovable doubts, the following will certainly be difficult to tightly grasp. However, even the tallest mountain can be dismantled when confronted by a severe resolute determination. I was placed by the desire of the Lord in the awkward post held by many of knowing yet subconsciously doubting the greatness of the Lord, therefore enabling me to lend insight into how one can conquer doubts concerning the Lord. These doubts, often compared to a great enemy, can be summarized very distinctly. All doubts about the Lord culminate in the contamination of desiring to become one with the Lord. to be situated on the same level as the Lord. The following example illustrates the situation and was regularly used by Prabhupada. Obviously, you can't talk to frogs, so it's not meant to be taken literally. The following is the story of the frog in the well. The frog was born and spent his entire life inhabiting a well. Now in this well was a tiny puddle of a pond, the center of the frog's field of activities. A passerby came upon the well and observed the frog situated at its bottom. The stranger began to explain to the frog the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, how it's filled with massive whales and an incalculable variety of other sea creatures and life. The frog immediately interrupted, "Is the Pacific Ocean twice as big as the pond in my well?" "No, you don't understand," replied the stranger, and began to describe the large volcanic islands climbing up from the sea, bursting with liquid molten. The frog interrupted again, "So the Pacific Ocean must be 3 times the size of my pond." Therefore, being unable to conceive of any existence beyond its very tiny field of activities, the frog was unable to calculate the existence of the vast ocean. So this is the situation. I cultivated this spiritual knowledge for years, yet I was unable to realize it factually because I subconsciously doubted the greatness of the Lord. I'm not suggesting that now I have completely realized the Lord. This in reality is not possible. However, by giving up this doubt of the Lord's greatness, I become an instrument tuned enough to be utilized by the Lord. What is the use of playing a badly out-of-tune instrument? There is no point in it in reality. The doubt of the Lord's greatness can be compared to diligently hiding from the Lord roosted in a tree. No, I shall not accept the greatness of the Lord. I shall hide in this tree and devise a means for defeating the Lord. Constitutes the ingredients of a futile battle. There is no branch high enough to hide from the Lord in this tree of doubtfulness. This is a fearful condition and should be abandoned. One should know that it is in one's own best interest to come down from this tree of doubtfulness, accept the Lord, and engage in his loving service. This is the solution to all one's distress. For years, when I read the descriptions of the amazing situation of this one universe, I heard about it, conceptualized it, and yet was unable to realize it factually due to subconsciously doubting the greatness of the Lord. I was consumed with doubt, and maybe was my final conclusion. I had no experience outside my tiny puddle of introspection, therefore I was relating everything to it. Yes, maybe the Lord is twice as powerful as I am, was my misconception. When faced with the truth, I was severely perplexed. I was required to choose to either accept the potency of the Lord or refuse to accept it. This is a difficult test. However, the wise can easily sidestep this test by hearing appropriately and acting accordingly. In a nutshell, this accepting or rejecting the potency of the Lord is the culmination of material education. It is the end of the stairwell of material knowledge. One begins with economic development and material religiosity. As one cultivates knowledge, the desire to become liberated and become one with the Lord manifests. After thorough research, rather than accepting the Lord, some choose to rather merge into the existence of the Lord. This merging, this becoming one with God, is the mature fruit of material understanding and is opposed to the transcendental spiritual being's welfare. This merging into the existence of the Lord is by no means an eternal safe haven for the inherently blissful spirit soul. It's described that due to the spirit soul's nature to always be active, annihilating one's identity can never be permanent. Again, the spirit soul shall desire to become active. Being unfit for the transcendental blissful realm of spirit, where the service of the Lord is a standard, one is again placed in this material realm. This cycle of rising up, culminating in the desire to become one with the Lord, and again falling down, is perpetually repeating in the existence of the doubting embodied spiritual living entities. This process is incalculably long and tedious. Often it is compared to the staggeringly slow growth of a cactus in the dry, severe desert. The cactus is climbing up towards the sky at 1 inch a year, enduring the brutal climate. So this is not at all a desirable situation. One can avoid this laborious tabernacle simply by hearing appropriately and acting accordingly. This tedious entanglement is taking place on account of the embrace of a staunch rebellious attitude, an outright refusal to acknowledge the potency of the Lord, all fueled by unpalatable association, which is in overwhelming abundance in our current field of activities. Surrendering to the blissful Lord is certainly going against the materialistic grain. Every sphere of association is encouraging one to act otherwise to different degrees in our current field of activities. One can easily avoid so much pain and trouble simply by hearing of the greatness of the Lord and enthusiastically executing devotional service to the all-blissful Lord. Any progress in this direction is accepted by the Lord. Unfortunately, some will never hear about and embrace the Lord's service. Therefore they endure so much distress. In this age of chaos, you shall find some of the most rebellious embodied spiritual beings. Many will refuse to serve the Lord, even by the easiest process. However, fortunately, in the current process for serving the Lord, even the hardest heart can find salvation. Therefore, there is hope for everyone here. If one simply agrees to hear and chant the glories of the Lord, at the same time, if one turns away from the infatuations of this age, even the most vacant heart can be regenerated with spiritual life. Currently, there is a great confusion about what is and what is not pious activity. If, through the agency of bad counsel, one believes they are acting appropriately, yet misunderstands what it means to be righteous, one will surely be misguided. Therefore, the foundation for pious activity must be understood from a devotee, not from the speculations of a fervent upstart. Therefore, having heard of the emptiness of the desire to become one with the Lord, and the futility in doubting the Lord and his devotees, one should immediately give up all doubts. In the same fashion, one gives up their own stool after passing it. This is in one's own best interest. So at this point, I'd like to discuss how the Lord is extending his energies into the material world, how he supplies the basic building blocks of the material realm. I'm going to be discussing the ethereal realm of the mind, how it exists and its functions, to relinquish the idea that what I'm about to speak of is a concoction of my imagination. I'll be providing scriptural reference from the Bhagavad Gita. Surely, in haste, some will dismiss my declarations about this realm. Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 7, Text 4. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separate material energies. In this verse, the Lord is declaring that the building blocks of this material manifestation are, in total, one of the energies of the Lord. This is spiritual energy transformed to appear as vacant of spirit. It only appears this way on account of the desire of the Lord. For the spirit soul desiring to live independently from the Lord supplies a field of alternative truth. These are the building blocks of this field of activity. Now, by combination similar to chemical reaction, the properties of sense objects develop from these 8 elements. The sense objects of sound, touch, taste, and smell all develop and are governed by the 3 modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. The first 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and air, comprise the girth of modern scientific research. However, besides these 4 elements is mind, intelligence, and false ego, along with ether, the field of activities for these last 3 elements. This subtle field of action remains a frontier unconquered by modern science. Now the mind is mistaken by some as the existence of the soul. However, it is described by the Lord in this verse as being one of the material energies of the Lord. This mental energy, being more subtle than the 4 gross elements, is mistaken by some as the all-in-all existence of the embodied living being. This is not so. Even more subtle than the mind is the spirit soul, which is described by the Lord to be different from the 8 gigantic material manifestations, including the mind. This material energy of the Lord is manifest sometimes, while other times it is not. So the existence of this world is not false, however it is temporary. By the will of the Lord is manifest and again unmanifest. The eternal transcendental spirit soul is not of this temporary nature. The spirit soul continues to exist after the annihilation of this material world. The spirit soul is by nature eternal, full of life, and active. Now the 5th element of material energy described by the Lord is ether, and it is the field of activity for the embodied spirit soul's mind. This ethereal existence of the embodied spirit soul is referred to as the subtle body. Our main gross experience of this realm is through communication facilitated by technology, making it possible to broadcast transmissions to one another through this ethereal element. This material element of ether is compared to a great ocean inhabited by the embodied beings in regards to mental activity. An example that illustrates this is how one continues to act while the gross material body is resting when one sleeps. So the majority of knowledge regarding this realm is dismissed by modern science. By the desire of the Lord, customary research of this realm slips through the hands of the modern scientist. Unable to use standard scientific methods for arriving at sound conclusions about mental activity, modern science gives preference to dismissing it as random chaos. The philosophy of the ostrich burying its head in the sand. This isn't happening, is the theme embraced. This ethereal realm is outside the scope of the modern scientist's full introspection. Therefore, blinded by pride, modern science embraces the conclusion that since we cannot understand Therefore no one can understand. However, those that accept on faith the knowledge descending from disciplic succession can understand. Unfortunately, modern science shall not hear of it. Rather, an insulated perception of reality is preferred, a perception that lends to the prestige of its analytical estimation of the truth. We have taken a vote and have arrived at the following estimation of the truth. Therefore it is so, is a shared conception. Undoubtedly, one is ultimately at liberty to believe whatever one desires to believe. However, oftentimes reality has a tendency to greet one like a freight train rather than a cool, pleasing breeze. Often, only after it is too late does one realize they are mistaken. So much trouble can be avoided simply by hearing from the appropriate source. I did not arrive at these estimations by visions seen upon a mountaintop. I am simply repeating what I have heard from my spiritual authorities. This mental ethereal realm is a very elusive frontier of consciousness. Perhaps I have been given more insight than most about this realm simply so I can report about it to you. This doesn't make me better than anyone. All can take to the loving service of the Lord and understand things as they are. One is also at liberty to never do this and believe whatever one desires to believe. One must, however, reap the fruit of the seed which has been sown. So this is the situation. Spiritual understanding of the loving service of the Lord is described as being simple and sublime simultaneously. Before I go into further detail of this ethereal realm, I'd like to discuss the properties of tantric energy. Now, perhaps you have heard of tantric sex. Undoubtedly, there are properties of sex in regards to tantric energy, which are misunderstood almost entirely. However, there is much more to it than just sexual energy. The definition of tantra is woven together. This means that performing one action has a direct correlation with another system of actions. All this is in direct relation to the following. What is taking place in regards to action within this gross material realm of earth, water, fire, and air is woven together with what is taking place in the ethereal realm. Tantric energy can be compared to a snowball starting out down a mountain as a tiny pebble of snow. Given favorable conditions, this pebble of snow can gain the momentum to displace large trees within its path. Enough eyeballs glued to television and computer screens takes on a life of its own in the ethereal field of activity. Tongues and ears engaged in relationship to cell phone use takes on an existence of its own in the subtle mental realm. The hot drink you feel you must have from a particular provider every morning. It's Friday night. I'll meet you at our favorite Mexican restaurant. All this has significance in regards to one's existence in the ethereal realm. It's based on simple properties. It is undoubtedly very difficult to conceptualize by one whose knowledge is rooted in the idea reality is founded on chaos. For one who can understand the greatness of the Lord, things can be understood as they are. The Lord is extraordinary beyond estimation. Naturally, any system emanating from the Lord will be endowed with similar extraordinary characteristics. This material world is fantastic because the Lord is fantastic. It's really that simple. Now, this ethereal existence of the living entity is filled with variegated forms. One may or may not believe. However, this is ultimately irrelevant. One is still existing on both levels. The more one is consumed by this ethereal existence, the less one is living in the gross material realm. This couldn't be more so than in our current field of activities. So many have given up working on a normal plane of reality. A majority of us have drifted away from engaging in work in the fields, farming, and building infrastructure, estimating it to be inferior activity. A preference to engage in occupations regarding this ethereal realm has become dominant, especially in the Western countries. However, this is not wise. One cannot eat the contents of a website, nor can one maintain oneself by any other product of this work. One can obtain money from engaging in this work to buy the necessities of life. This is all dependent on the health of the system as a whole. It is entirely maintained by electricity, and there is ultimately no guarantee that man shall indefinitely have electricity. It's a fact that the system as a whole shall collapse without the constant readily supply of fossil fuels. Petroleum is undoubtedly in a limited calculable supply. It shall eventually run out. Then what? So enthusiastically heading down this path can be defined as nothing less than irresponsible. Most people are innocent and simply go with the flow, the burden of fault being on the shoulders of their irresponsible leaders. However, material nature is very stringent. Does a hot stove refrain from burning a child that carelessly touches it? No, this is a child. I shall not burn this innocent child. Is not the response of Mother Nature. Please take this into consideration. Moving on. This ethereal realm is also inhabited by embodied living beings that have given preference to existing entirely in this realm after death. It is also the field of activities for celestial beings of innumerable variety. This is the realm of ghosts and spirits of all types, the realm of demons and angels. The classifications of these beings and their many unique identifying traits cannot accurately be described in reality. This inconceivable display of variety is all a product of the Lord's unlimited splendor. On account of the desire of the Lord, direct interactions between these celestial beings and humans have been suspended at present. There is some crossing over, but very little comparatively. However, these celestial beings, I'll refer to the entire lot of these beings, good and evil, as celestial beings, do interact, influence, and control humans through the interactions upon the ethereal plane. Now, the influencing and controlling of humans should be stressed. Materially speaking, the material advanced celestial beings of all types are in a superior position to humans. They tend to be endowed with intelligence and other material facilities that can be called materially superior to humans. However, generally they are less endowed with spiritual introspection. They are situated in a certain category of the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. They can be identified as leaning toward one side of the pendulum or the other, good or evil. However they are situated is generally how they remain. They don't have the same capacity as humans to assimilate spiritual truths. Now, there are certainly exceptions to this rule, and the highly advanced celestial beings know that human life is spiritually special. In general, by the design of the Lord, human life is specifically meant to provide all the tools needed on every level to facilitate the spirit soul's emancipation from material existence. This makes human life very special in relation to the embodied spiritual being's ultimate welfare. Now, in this material world, there is always a competition between the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. In biblical terms, this is in reference to the battle between good and evil. The idea of a little character dressed in red, sporting a tail and pitchfork, living at the center of the earth, dueling with God, shouldn't seriously be entertained. There are innumerable evil spirits and powerful demons, all enthusiastically fighting with each other. There are also celestial beings situated as godly, that are always opposed to this bad element. These godly celestial beings have been entrusted by the Lord with controlling administrative functions within this universe. Some demons know there is a God, yet they are always opposed to his service and are always envious of the demigods, also known as angels. The demigods are all situated to different degrees as devotees of the Lord. Now, another classification of these otherworldly beings are outright atheistic. They care very little about an existence of a God. Rather, they are always very anxious to impersonate the Lord and his administrative servants. They are very busy as charades of the true administration of the Lord. This is the situation. Due to their downright refusal to believe in a supreme God, they can never actually be in any administrative position within God's governing system. This leaves a severe unfulfilled desire within the core of their hearts. Having mercy upon them, the Lord can understand their hearts and facilitates this desire by giving them an opportunity to impersonate the real administrators for some brief time. This lends to the magnanimity of the Lord. Even though their sole purpose is to decry the existence of the Lord, they are still not neglected by the Lord. He is still very anxious to satisfy their hearts as much as possible. However, they are always set on usurping the property of the Lord. Therefore, this is what they always remain: thieves. They cause all sorts of havoc, distort proper understanding, and basically, if left to their own means, would destroy everything everywhere they go. The tree cutters. These atheistic celestial beings are currently influencing this planet through control and influence upon human beings on the mental ethereal platform. To be frank, I strongly desire to foil all their nefarious activities. I would very much like to bring them around to the loving service of the Lord as well. Whether I can or not is ultimately irrelevant. I believe it's better to show up than not. Therefore, I'm going to extend my best foot forward in accomplishing this. Armed with proper understanding, one can at the least sidestep this influence and become empowered to make spiritual advancement headed in the opposite direction of this unpalatable influence. Like I said earlier, there is hope for all in our present field of activities. I hold high hopes that even those severely opposed to the loving service of the Lord can be saved. I sincerely hope this element comes around. So utilizing the tools I've attained, I shall not sign on to this bad element. By making the appropriate choices in my own life and encouraging others to make wise decisions, I shall resist this element. This is rather easy to accomplish by taking refuge in the blissful, loving service of the Lord. I strongly encourage one to become the Lord's devotee. The benefit of this is incalculable. Similar to the ocean, the tide is always moving forward and retracting in universal affairs. Sometimes there is a prevalent evil influence, while other times there is not. Maybe you're familiar with the story of the rabbit and the lion. The lion was killing so many animals in the forest. So the clever fox said, "Let us make one offering a day to the lion, therefore we do not all become victims." The animals approached the lion with a proposal. "Please take one animal a day and be satisfied. We shall deliver this sacrifice to you." That sounds very nice," said the lion. "I will no longer be bothered with having to hunt." Therefore the lion agreed. Now it came time for the rabbit to be sacrificed to the lion. "Perhaps I shall die today," said the rabbit, "but first I shall play a trick upon the lion." The rabbit approached the lion, and the lion immediately roared, "Why are you so late?" "I'm sorry, great king of the forest, but upon traveling here I was intercepted by another lion, and this lion said he desires to kill you." "Take me to him," said the lion. The rabbit led the lion to a nearby well. The lion looked down in the well and saw another lion, his own reflection. When he roared, he heard the echo, and it appeared to be the other lion. "I shall kill this lion at once." In great anger, the lion jumped to the bottom of the well and was killed by the fall. Therefore, the lion was outwitted by the rabbit. So to bring this chapter to its conclusion, material knowledge is limited and simultaneously very elusive. Due to the deeply rooted desires of the embodied living entity, so many speculations develop, all founded to different degrees on illusion. The material realm without the guidance of Scripture is certain to have a disastrous finale of severe consequences. This is not the dwelling place for any sane personality. It's a fact. If one is situated in this realm of matter, regardless of form, one is vulnerable to grave danger at all times. There are no guarantees for one engaged in material fruitive activities. All is teetering on displacement at any moment. This is the core nature of material activities. Even one traveling the safest road can be deviated due to the long-lived desire to enjoy outside the jurisdiction of the Lord's loving service. What to speak of others? Therefore one must be always alert and sincerely pray for the assistance of the merciful Lord. This web of material existence has creatively been arranged to bring forth a revolution in the originally blissful spirit soul's consciousness. It has all been arranged by the Lord to give impetus to its rejection. One who misses this truth becomes deeply entangled in one's own mental speculations, which flow forth with unlimited variety. Therefore, one simply needs to revert back to their original and natural activity, engaging in the loving service of the Lord. By acting according to appropriate guidance and embracing a stout, resolute determination, one can attain this perfect goal. There is no better time for accomplishing this than right now. The entire field of activities we now find ourselves is saturated with unpalatable elements. Therefore, there should be no indecisiveness in the minds of the intelligent. All desirable things are to be had by one who engages in the sublime process of devotional service to the blissful Lord. One engaged in devotional service is so protected that material contamination can have no significant influence in the sincere devotee's activities. This freedom can be had by anyone that takes up this process very seriously. All unpalatable elements are, at the end of the day, factually terrified of the Lord. Therefore these elements retreat like disturbed bats upon even the mention of the Lord. What to speak of the pure loving service of the Lord? Therefore, free from all misgivings, one should participate in the blissful service of God. This is in one's own best interest. It's important to consider this. One cannot, however, just capriciously take to the service of God. God who? This world is inundated with living entities that have been endowed with some controlling power that is in the likes of the Lord. At the same time, there is only one ultimate Lord. Now the Lord accepts names in accordance with his relationships between himself and his devotees. One must learn of these particular aspects of the Lord from the Lord's devotee and serve the Lord according to these characteristics of the Lord's personality. Krishna means the all-attractive one. All desirable qualities can be found to their fullest representation within the personality of the Lord. Therefore, for the devotee of the Lord, this is the perfect name for the Lord. There is no limit to the names of the Lord, just as there are no limits to any of the other transcendental qualities to be found in the Lord. This does not hold true to any personality endowed with some dimension of God's qualities here in this material world, and all paths do not lead to the same destination. One who worships some personality within this material world shall attain the destination defined by that particular worship. Those that worship the Supreme Lord on the counsel of a genuine devotee shall attain the real Lord, and their material miseries shall no longer plague their existence. This is important to consider. In regards to the determined naysayers, there is hope. This material field of activity is like a great turbulent ocean. We are all prone, influenced by false ego, to believe we are in control of all that takes place in regards to our existence. This is simply not so. The duality of desire and hate are compared to massive waves in the ocean of material existence, tossing us back and forth. Due to a lengthy association with the rebellious, uncontrolled mind, today one may be very adverse to the Lord's service, but the circumstances of one's material tranquility are always in jeopardy. Given favorable circumstances, bewildered by distress, one may feel the exact opposite tomorrow. Like I said, back and forth. We would all like to imagine that this is all within the grasp of our control. In reality, this is simply not so. The Lord is famous for delivering the two brothers Jaggai and Maddai. I won't go into a detailed description of their past before they became devotees, because ultimately their past has no relevance. Once having taken to the devotional service of the Lord, their past nefarious activities can have no standing. Just to illustrate how bad they were, they very enthusiastically killed priests and were infamous as the worst prostitute hunters. By the mercy of the Lord, they were delivered after being overwhelmed by distress and became devotees of the Lord. Therefore, there is hope for everyone, and no one needs to consider their past activities in relationship to their initiation into the devotional service of the Lord. The nature of this age is that it is inundated with ignorance. It's very easy to make bad choices in our current field of activities. If one agrees to give up all unpalatable activities, engage in the Lord's service, one becomes eligible for liberation. Never mind one's past activities. One must only be sincere and agree not to revert back to one's old ways. And in reality, there is no question of deceiving the Lord in the matter of one's sincerity. The Lord understands the hearts of all living entities. It all has to do with one's practical activities. Therefore, the idea that I shall do as I please, I am saved, ultimately does not hold water. If one is saved, one will give up all sinful activities. This is a symptom of being saved and can be metered by how one acts. How one should act should be learned from a devotee. Who is a genuine devotee of the Lord? This will be self-evident by the devotee's activities. There's no question of mistaking the moon for one of the other trillion luminaries situated in the vast sky. Everyone can understand, yes, that is the moon. In the following chapter, I shall evaluate the position of those that will never listen to reason. The Lord frankly describes that some will never surrender to his service. I wish not to throw rocks at them. However, their influence and association needs to be discussed, so one who desires to head in the opposite direction can. A friend